South Wales Goth, but I'm not referring to those young people from the valleys, including Machen, whom I befriended in the Lexington or Nero's in Cardiff, but a Welsh author of Gothic horror, whom influenced HP Lovecraft, Stephen King, Dan Brown, Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, George Lucas, Guillermo del Toro, Barry Humphries, the Right Reverend Rowan Williams, and Marquis Smith, and yet is relatively unknown. This is Arthur Machen, born 3rd of March 1863, died 15th of December 1947. A Welsh author and mystic of the early 1890s and early 20th century, best known for his influential supernatural fantasy and horror fiction. Of living creatures of cosmic fear raised to its most artistic pitch, few if any can hope to equal the versatile Arthur Machen, author of some dozen tales long and short, in which the element of hidden horror and brooding fright attain an almost incompatible substance and realistic acuteness. His powerful horror material of the 90s and early 1900s stands alone in its class and marks a distinct epoch in the history of this literary form, HP Lovecraft. His novella, The Great God Pan, has garnered a reputation as a classic horror, with Stephen King describing it as maybe the best horror story in the English language. He is well known for The Bowmen, a short story that was widely read as fact, creating the legend of the Angels of Mons. Machen's birthplace, the square High Street Caerleon, the landscape of Gwent with its association of Brythonic, Roman and medieval history made a powerful impression on him, and his love of it is at the heart of many of his works. Despite really being a suburb of Newport, Caerleon was the capital of the Gwent kingdom, providing it with an authentically Welsh heritage. Indeed, Caerleon is immortal in the romance of King Arthur and the Grail and the Round Table. Machen was not alone in his Arthurian interest. In 1856, Alfred Lord Tennyson had worked on his epic Idylls of the King while staying at Caerleon's ancient coaching inn, the Hanbury Arms. I am a citizen of what was once no mean city, the city of Caerleon on Usk, once the splendid Isca Celerum, the headquarters of the 2nd Augustan Legion, and then again a golden mist of legend grew about it. It became the capital of King Arthur's court of fairy and enchantment, the chief city of a cycle of romance that has charmed the world. Wonderful was it to stand in the evening on the circle of the Roman amphitheatre and see the sun flame above Twin Barlin, the mystical tumulus on the mountain wall of the west. Machen was descended from a long line of clergymen, the family having originated in Carmarthenshire. In 1864, when Machen was 2, his father, John Edward Jones, became the rector of the parish of Llanddewi, Farc and Llandegef, about 5 miles north of Caerleon, and Machen was brought up at the rectory there. Jones had adopted his wife's name, Machen, to inherit a legacy, legally becoming Jones Machen. His son used the shortened version, Arthur Machen, as a pen name. At the age of 11, Machen boarded at Hereford Cathedral School, where he received a good education. His family could not afford for him to attend a university, and Machen went to London, where he sat but failed exams for entrance to medical school. He displayed some literary promise, and in 1881 published a long poem on the subject of the Eleusinian Mysteries. He attempted to make a living as a journalist, publicist clerk, and a children's tutor, devoting his evenings to writing and solitary walks. In 1887, when his father died, Machen married Amelia, known as Amy Hogg, an unconventional music teacher with a passion for the theatre, who had literally friends in London's bohemian circles, including Jerome K. Jerome. Hogg introduced Machen to the writer and occultist A.E. Waite of Rider-Waite Tarot Frame, who became one of Machen's closest friends. Soon after his marriage, Machen began to receive a series of legacies from Scottish relatives that allowed him to gradually devote more time to writing. Around 1890, Machen began to publish in literary magazines, writing stories influenced by the works of Robbie Louis Stevenson, some of which used gothic or fantastic themes. This led to his first major success, The Great God Pan. It was published in 1894 by John Lane in a noted keynote series, which was part of the growing aesthetic movement of the time, with a pictorial title page designed by Aubrey Beardsley, one of my favourite illustrators. Unfortunately, the critics were less than impressed with the publication. His horror, we regret to say, leaves us quite cold, and our flesh ostensibly refuses to creep, the Chronicle. Machen's story, widely denounced for its sexual and horrific content, consequently sold well, going into a second edition. In The Great God Pan, he presents the strange investigations of Dr. Raymond, who performs brain surgery on a young girl, Mary, somehow realising Pan in the modern world. Later it is revealed that the debauched Helen is Mary's daughter and is fathered by the god. Machen writes that Helen's body is a conduit which, in acting as the interface between the mystical and evil and material world, is dissolved into an amorphous shapelessness, as the sign of mental and spiritual collapse. Machen's life was a grind for economic struggle, economic survival, a struggle with the material world. But his writing was the reverse in proposition, an engagement not with dull facts, but with a world of imagination and liminal spaces which are really intersects with the unknown. The Vale of Usk was a source of spiritual sustenance, and sometimes he makes contact with an ancient and threatening evil inspired by Malayan Celticism or classicism, the enchanted land. The first of these recalls the visionary romanticism of William Blake and Samuel Palmer, while the second is concerned with the workings of paganism and its capacity to disrupt the everyday working of what is accepted as reality. They were in the heart of wilderness of hills and valleys that had been looked upon. They were going down a wild, steep hillside where a narrow path wound in and out amongst gorse and towering bracken, and the sun gleaming out for a moment. There was a gleam of white water far below the narrow valley, where a little brook poured and rippled from a stone to stone, and that was a fragment of life from the white people. Machen next produced The Three Impostors, a novel composed of a number of interwoven tales, in 1895. The novel and stories in it were eventually to be regarded as amongst Machen's best works. However, following the scandal surrounding Oscar Wilde later that year, Machen's association with works of decadent horror made it difficult for him to find a publisher for new works. Thus he would write some of his greatest works over the next few years. Some were published much later. These include The Hill of Dreams, Hieroglyphics, A Fragment of Life, the story The White People, and the stories which make up The Ornaments in Jade. In 1899, Machen's wife Amy died of cancer after a long period of illness. He only gradually recovered from his loss over the next year, partially through his close friendship with A.E. Waite. It was through Waite's influence that Machen joined, at this time, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Despite not becoming an active member, he joined fellow authors Arthur Conan Doyle and Edith Nesbit, author of The Railway Children. The House of Souls, London, Grant Richards, 1906. Machen's recovery was further helped by a sudden change of career, becoming an actor in 1911 and a member of Frank Benson's company of travelling players, a profession which took him around the country. This led in 1903 to a second marriage to Dorothy Purfoy Huddleston, which brought Machen much happiness. In 1906, Machen's literary career began once more to flourish with the book The House of Souls, collected his most notable works from the 90s and brought them back to a new audience. Machen was at the time beginning to investigate Celtic Christianity, the Holy Grail and King Arthur. These ideas also featured heavily in the novel The Secret Glory, which he wrote at this time, marking the first use in fiction the idea of the Grail surviving into modern times in some form. In 1906, The Hill of Dreams, generally considered Machen's masterpiece, was finally published. It was not recognised at the time. The next few years saw Machen continue with acting in various companies, with journalistic work, but he was finding it increasingly hard to earn a living, and his legacies were long exhausted. The coming of war in 1914 saw Machen return to public prominence for the first time in 20 years, to the publication of Bowmen and subsequent publicity surrounding the Angels of Mons episode. Loose flowing were the garments, their hair was burning gold. Oh, they were fairer than the sun god like their mould. We gazed worthy shining shapes, all of which the prophets tell. We knew not yet, but we felt we looked on Michael and Gabriel, and the centre shining seemed the Christ, whose wounds heaven gates unbar, and neath his feet once pierced for us, there burned one golden star, and in their hands was shining bright that smote the tyrant's pride. Christ and his holy angels were fighting on our side. And that was Douglas MacKechnie. He published a series of stories capitalising on this success, most of which were morale-boosting propaganda, but most notable The Great Return 1915 and the novella Terror 1917 were more accomplished. He also published a series of autobiographical articles during the war, later reprinted in the book form of Far Off Things. During the war years, Machen also met and championed the work of fellow Welshman Caradoc Evans. Evans' writing focused on Welsh complacency and smugness by contrasting the pieties of nonconformist Christianity with the brutal realities of poverty, meanness and hypocrisy that he had personally experienced. The year 1922 saw a revival in Machen's literary fortunes. The Secret Glory, considered by some to be Machen's final masterpiece, was belatedly published, as well as the autobiographical Far Off Things and new editions of his Casanova translation, The House of Souls and The Hill of Dreams. Machen's work now found a new audience and publishers in the United States, and a series of requests for publications of books started to come in. Another sign of his rising fortunes was the publication of the 1923 of a collection edited of his works, the Caerleon edition, and a bibliography. The next year saw the publication of recently completed second volume of the autobiographical Things Near and Far, and the third and final volume, The London Adventure, being published in 1924. Machen's earlier work started to become much sought after collector's items at the time, a position they have held ever since. In 1924 he issued a collection of bad reviews of his own work, with very little commentary, under the title Precious Balms. In this period of prosperity, Machen's home saw many visitors and social gatherings. 1926, the booming republication was mostly over, and Machen's income dropped. In 1925, Machen and his family moved away from London to Amersham, but they still faced financial hardship. He received some recognition for his literary work when he received a civil list pension of £100 per annum in 1932. Machen's financial difficulties were only finally ended by the literary appeal launched in 1943 for his 80th birthday. The initial names on the appeal show the general recognition of Machen's stature as a distinguished man of letters, as they included Max Beerbohm, T.S. Eliot, Bernard Shaw, Walter de la Mare, Algernon Blackwood and John Mansfield. The success of the appeal allowed Machen to live the last few years of his life until 1947 in relative comfort. Machen espoused a mystical belief that the humdrum ordinary world hid a more mysterious and strange world beyond. His Gothic and decadent works of the 1890s concluded that lifting of this veil could lead to madness, or death, and often a combination of all three. Machen's later work became solely less obviously full of Gothic trappings, but for him investigation into mysteries inevitably resulted in life-changing transformation and sacrifice. Machen loved a medieval worldview because he felt it manifested deep spirituality alongside a rambunctious earthiness. Machen was a great enthusiast for literature that expressed the rapture, beauty, adoration, wonder, awe, mystery, sense of unknown, desire of the unknown, that's summed up in the word ecstasy. Machen's strong opposition to materialist viewpoint is obvious to many in his works, making him a part of neo-romanticism. He was deeply suspicious of science, materialism, commerce and puritanism, all of which were anathemas to Machen's conservative, bohemian, mystical and ritualistic temperament. Machen, the son of a Church of England clergyman, always held Christian beliefs, though accompanied by a fascination with sensual mysticism. His interests in paganism and the occult were especially prominent in his early works. Machen was well read on such matters as alchemy, the Kabbalah and Hermeticism, and these occult interests formed part of his close friendship with A.E. Waite. Machen, however, was always very down to earth, requiring substantial proof that a supernatural event had occurred, and was thus highly sceptical of spiritualism. After his experimentation with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Horn, the orthodox ritual of the Church became even more important to him, gradually defining his role as a high Church Anglican, as I was, who was to incorporate elements of his own mystical experience, Celtic Christianity and readings in literature and legend into his thinking. In latter years, Machen became a Roman Catholic. Started researching Arthur Machen. I was sure that I'd be critical of him. Not least I'd been left so disappointed when researching people like Margaret Murray and Gerald Gardner. Like his Victorian contemporaries, he exhibited an interest in magic, even joining the Golden Dawn. He was keen to explore the myth of a Celtic past, including the Arthurian legend. But he worked with what he had. The debate about Brythonic or Celtic origins had not even started, and as today all Welshmen are keen to claim Arthur for their own. And why not? But I don't believe Machen took himself too seriously. He knew that what he was writing was fiction, and I don't believe attempted to create a mythology from his fiction, unlike Iolo McGanwy. Like myself, he grew up in the Anglo-Catholic tradition and was much more a mystic than a magician. Like myself, he was massively influenced by the English Romantics, especially Blake. He was acutely interested in the sense of place and historiography, stretching into folklore, just as I do. He was keen to merge all this into an exploration of the transgressive, including sexuality, all of which greatly appeals to me, and would even more so had been a straight-laced Victorian. Like Craddock Evans, he was exposing the double standards of Methodism in the valleys, a theme which Dylan Thomas brilliantly takes up but hardly expands. I'm sure that as a high Anglican, he was not glorifying or transgressive, simply accepting. Thus, through his Celtic mythology, he screams out that there is not only one gay in the village. Whilst he was master of the Gothic novel, I'm not entirely certain he was a Goth, more a romantic ascetic, closer to Mary Webb than HP Lovecraft. I'm sure that, like me, he would have frequented the Lexington and Neros. Like me, he would have befriended the Valley Goths, but I suspect as much a voyeur as a part of the gang as I was. No, somehow I think I would have got on well with Arthur Machen.